What if a squadron of drones could bypass a dense defense line and hit a Russian plane right on its own runway?
At 5:17 a.m. on September 25th, the calm surface of the Black Sea shattered in an instant. 6 Ukrainian Beaver drones burst from the low cloud layer east of Kherson, skimming just 4 meters above rising swells as if the ocean itself were pulling them forward. Their operators had calculated a narrow corridor, an older radar seam the Russians rarely checked before sunrise. For nearly 2 minutes, everything looked clean. Too clean. Then the alert tone hit. A single sharp, metallic warning. The kind that makes the hair on your neck rise even if you're sitting thousands of kilometers away. The lead drone's threat receiver flashed a vector from the northwest. A Russian intercept missile, launched from 11.8 kilometers, was already accelerating past Mach 2.9 and closing fast. The shockwave alone could tear a drone apart. The operator reacted on pure instinct and training. He shoved the Beaver down so hard, its composite skin groaned, dropping from wave height to 2.7 meters, close enough that salt spray began streaking the lens. The missile tried to match the dive, but geometry and physics were unforgiving. At 850 meters per second, even a slight correction becomes a crisis. The missile struck the water with a detonation powerful enough to throw a plume 14 meters into the air. Shrapnel sliced across the formation, shredding the right wing of the second drone and sending it spiraling into the sea in a spray of broken carbon fiber. 5 remained, but those 5 scattered like sparks from a grinder, each breaking off at a different angle, each fighting the turbulence from the explosion as they clawed for stability. The mission wasn't broken. It had just shifted into a higher gear. If you were the operator in that moment, your drone shaking, the sea inches below, what would your next move be? At 5:31 a.m., the 5 surviving Beavers tore across the Black Sea in a loose scatter formation, exactly what their operators needed to keep the Russian fire control computers guessing. But the calm didn't last. The moment they crossed the invisible line where the radar seam ended, an unmistakable green spike flashed across the threat display. A Torm M2, parked exactly where no one expected it. Somebody on the Russian side had been studying drone routes closely, because the Torm had been moved just hours earlier. Its search radar locked all 5 Beavers at 12.2 kilometers, tagging each with a digital marker before the operators even processed what was happening. The system's guidance computer calculated intercept curves in microseconds. The operators felt the pressure in their chests, even through screens and antennas, because they had less than 22 seconds before the first missile reached lethal range. One drone broke formation deliberately. It rolled left, climbed sharply to 118 meters, and turned its full belly toward the radar beam. That maneuver increased its radar signature by more than triple, turning a normally tiny return into something resembling a small aircraft. Soviet-era logic inside the Torm's software interpreted the sudden size jump as a priority threat. 2 missiles launched instantly, streaking away at 1,020 meters per second, chasing the decoy that was never meant to survive. The remaining 4 Beavers dropped to 3 to 4 meters, hugging the sea until the onboard altimeters began screaming. The water blurred into a single sheet of steel blue beneath them. The Torm tried to reacquire, but inside its minimum engagement zone of 1.4 kilometers, its missiles couldn't arm fast enough. The system was powerful, just not built for this geometry. The Torm operator radioed a warning down the chain, and that message was about to land somewhere much more dangerous. The Torm operator's warning hit the Black Sea Fleet's watch network at 0528 hours. It wasn't poetic, but it carried weight. 4 low-profile drones were slipping through the gaps. That message jumped through encrypted relays until it reached a lone Raptor patrol boat stationed behind an abandoned gas platform, rusted legs rising 28 meters above the morning haze. The Raptor had been sitting there since midnight, engines cold, radar silent, positioned with almost surgical precision. Russian naval analysts believed Ukrainian drones preferred to cross the coast between 0530 and 0600, the quiet window when night watch ended and morning duty began. That prediction for once was correct. At 5:31 a.m., the 4 beavers appeared on the Raptor's thermal imaging display. 4 bright points against a 14 degrees Celsius C, their engines burning at nearly 185 degrees Celsius. The contrast made them visible from 3.3 kilometers, even through wind-driven spray. The ambush began with a burst of 14.5 millimeter tracer fire erupting from the Upravleni remote weapon station. Each round carried enough energy to punch cleanly through 25 millimeters of steel plate. The lead beaver absorbed 6 hits in under 2 seconds, the round slicing through its composite shell and out the other side. But the drone's internal layout, electronics spaced against the corners, minimal structural density, worked in its favor. Nothing vital was struck. The operator responded by pulling the drone into a steep climb to 92 meters, rising past the gun's 60-degree elevation limit. The Raptor accelerated hard, rolling up to 49 knots, but at that speed the hull began skipping across the waves, throwing the fire control stabilizer into constant correction. 3 beavers slipped past the stern and vanished toward Crimea, setting the stage for the next layer of pursuit. The moment the 3 surviving beavers slipped past the Raptor's reach, the next alarm lit up on a different screen, this time inside the cockpit of a Ka-52 Alligator already orbiting 29 kilometers east of the intercept point. The helicopter had been circling for nearly 2 hours, burning 510 liters of fuel per hour, and now had barely 37 minutes of flight time left to intervene. At 5:38 a.m., ground control vectored the Ka-52 toward the drone's projected path. The pilot banked so hard the dual rotors carved tight, overlapping arcs against the dim sky, the coaxial system giving him torque-free agility few helicopters could match. Radar contact came almost immediately. 4 faint signatures at 8.4 kilometers, moving low and fast. He armed a Vickers missile, a weapon designed to fracture tank armor rather than intercept drones. But it was the only option with range. The missile launched at nearly Mach 2, its tail-mounted seeker following a coated laser beam projected from the helicopter. Against armored vehicles at predictable distances, it was devastating. Against wave-skimming drones weaving at 150 kilometers per hour, it was guesswork. The missile passed within 3.2 meters of the lead beaver, close enough that turbulence jolted the airframe, but the proximity fuse never triggered. The drone's tiny radar return simply didn't meet the activation threshold. The pilot switched tactics, flooding the radio band with 100-watt jamming pulses. The drones instantly lost contact with their operators, but instead of falling, they snapped into autonomous mode, shifting to waypoint guidance with eerie precision. 1 climbed to 208 meters, 1 held at 58, and 2 carved along the surface barely 1.5 meters above the waves. The Ka-52 rolled into a diving curve, trying to line up its 30mm cannon. But time and friendly fire risk were closing in faster than the drones themselves. At 5:45 a.m., the 3 remaining beavers crossed the Crimean coastline, a threshold that triggered every sensor Russia had pointed southward. The instant their GPS markers passed over land, 2 powerful systems lit up: the MR-10M-1 coastal surveillance radar and a mobile podlet. K-1 array relocated just 48 hours earlier. Together, they swept a combined airspace of more than 7,000 square kilometers, powered by pulses reaching 210 kilowatts at peak output. On the operator's screens, the drones appeared as faint slivers, barely thicker than static lines. But static lines don't move at 155 kilometers per hour with perfect waypoint timing. The radar crew scrambled to coordinate with the Panzer units at Kacha airfield, but the timing could not have been worse. After a previous attack 4 days earlier, from the north, the Panzers had been rotated to cover the northern approach. Rotating them back to face south required 31 seconds. In modern air defense, that's an eternity. The lead beaver locked onto the MR-10M1 signal like a needle snapping to a magnet. The radar's beam was effectively shouting its position. Constant sweeps every 0.7 seconds, broadside reflections off surrounding terrain, and a vertical lobe strong enough to be detected nearly 40 kilometers offshore. The drone climbed from 56 to 181 meters, aligning itself directly with the antenna cluster. At 195 kilometers per hour, it struck the primary array, detonating a 5.6 kilogram shaped charge that sent a narrow jet of molten copper slicing through its internal waveguides. The radar shut down in a blink. 7 seconds later, the second beaver broke from cover, using the rolling terrain to create false echoes. The Podlet K1 briefly showed 3 identical targets at 38, 62, and 104 meters, a classic multi-path ghosting effect. By the time the operator manually identified which was real, the drone was already diving. The impact tore through the Podlet's rotating assembly, sending panels and cabling across the pad. 2 radars down, 1 target left. With both coastal radars collapsing into silence, the last beaver adjusted its heading toward Kacha airfield, now just 11.2 kilometers away. The drone's structural logs showed more than 40% control surface degradation from earlier shrapnel damage. Yet, its waypoint system held the line. Its altitude wavered between 31 and 42 meters, each dip threatening to drop it into the rising heat shimmer over Crimea's coastal flats. At 6 a.m., the drone crested the final ridgeline. Kacha opened beneath it like a blueprint. Hardened shelters to the west, a fuel apron to the east, and in the center, 2 AN-26 transports. Tail numbers partially obscured, but unmistakably the same pair repositioned after a previous strike. Both sat less than 62 meters apart, a spacing that offered convenience to ground crews but terrible odds in the face of precision-guided threats. The damaged beaver lined up its approach from 192 meters out, descending at an angle of nearly 68 degrees. Inside its nose, 5.4 kilograms of explosive material stabilized against mounting vibration. The airfield's pantsers, still mid-rotation from their earlier repositioning, had neither angle nor timing to respond. At 6:01 a.m., the beaver hit the first AN-26 between the wing root and fuselage spine. A brief flash followed by a pressure wave rolled across the tarmac. Alloy panels liquefied at temperatures peaking above 1,850 degrees Celsius, collapsing the aircraft's frame in seconds. The final beaver arrived milliseconds later, striking the second transport and triggering a secondary plume rising nearly 38 meters, a marker visible even from offshore patrol craft. By sunrise, satellite images confirmed what the operators already knew: Kacha had been pierced again. By the time the first sunlight brushed across the Black Sea, the smoke columns rising from Kacha told the entire story without needing a single radio report. 2 AN-26 transports, once part of the logistical backbone for Crimea, now lay in molten fragments, their outlines barely recognizable under the thermal bloom captured from orbit. The radars meant to guard them were gone, the coastal surveillance net was fractured, and the chain of defenses that should have stopped a small formation of slow, low-flying drones had instead reacted too late, too slowly, and in all the wrong directions. What happened between 5:17 and 6:01 a.m. wasn't just an attack. It was a demonstration of how timing, geometry, and adaptation can outweigh raw hardware. Each layer of defense, Torm, Raptor, Ka-52, coastal radars, pantsers, worked exactly as designed. And yet, each one was defeated not by brute force, but by exploiting a weakness. Minimum range gaps, elevation limits, software assumptions, rotation delays, and human reaction time. In military textbooks, layered defense is supposed to provide certainty. On September 25th, it produced the opposite. A handful of beavers forced a high-value airfield to rethink every assumption it depended on. And that's the part worth remembering. Because modern conflict isn't only about speed or firepower. It's about who adapts first, who learns faster, and who is willing to redesign their tactics between one sunrise and the next. Ukraine didn't win this engagement with bigger weapons. They won it with better decisions made in seconds. Now, I want to hear from you. If you were commanding the defense that morning, which layer would you fix first? The coastal radars, the patrol craft, or the short-range missiles? Tell me what you think below, and if you enjoy these deep dive breakdowns, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for the next mission.